We're about to dive into another episode of Running with Scissors, the podcast that helps you understand who and what you truly are in the world. Buckle up as we unpack strategies to unlock your full potential so you can stop running with scissors and get the most out of your life, work, and relationships. Let's go!
How was that? The balance?
You did it. I was like, oh, that sounds so much better. I can hear her. It's amazing.
Right. All right. So if you listen to the first 5 episodes of this podcast, we're sorry. We take it all back because the intro music wasn't perfect. But here we are. All right. Let's dive in, though. Another episode of Running with Scissors. And this one, I think personally, I'm the most excited about so far. I think the topic for today is the most easily accessible portion of the HumanOp technology. And it's that aha moment for people when talking about interpersonal dynamics. And it is alchemy or boundaries of tolerance. Both of those words we use on the HumanOp app if you've seen them. Wei, what is alchemy for you? Do you have a similar experience when explaining to people?
Yeah, here's the thing about alchemy. You are not alone in that. Every time we go into the explanation of it, back when we were doing it in person and helping people give their results in person, like
in the old days,
in the old days where we did things by hand and we built out presentations and people had to schedule just to get their results a time with us for 90 minutes or more, right?
This is in the time of the dinosaurs? When was this?
It's like, yeah. Well, the technology did exist back then. It just wasn't translated the way it is today. Now, that being said, alchemy is an interesting thing. And then beyond just relational, it's one of those things where if you've ever wanted to know how to create the best environment for you at work, the best environment for you at home, the best environment where you live, to be passively supportive of your most optimal existence, understanding alchemy is the key. Beyond just understanding of relationships, because we tell people all the time is that it's just nature. It's when nature comes into play to help you understand where challenges in relationships come from. We often say this: alchemic incompatibility is the number one reason why relationships of any kind, be it personal or business, become challenged. And that's why alchemy is such a huge piece. I mean, for a long time, we were thinking about or pontificating about whether or not we should just offer alchemy as a piece to help people with their relationships. Because most of the time when people come to me with challenges in relationship at work, at home, in personal life, the first place I look usually is, okay, let's see what the alchemy is between these two individuals. Because that's the part that you really can't create meaningful strategies around to adapt to it, because it's just the nature of things. Now, where that comes from is this: that alchemy has to do with refinement, right? We see this in nature, right? In different alchemic environments, there's a different ecosystem that survives there and thrives there, okay? And similarly, there are things that don't thrive in those ecosystems. For example, there is a big alchemic difference between a small pond of standing water that doesn't flow, right, versus a roaring river of fresh water that constantly goes through, right? If you've ever been out in nature and you think about the type of ecological systems that survive and thrive in those environments, it's very different, right? You've got moss, you've got things that grow that cannot grow when there's water movement, right? And so then the smells are also different, right? If you go around standing water, what are the smells like? Versus a water that's high in oxygen and it's constantly flowing and you can smell. So that's why people who go to, moving rivers and everything like that, they like to take a deep breath, right? They go to a place where there's standing water and there's moss and there's striders and there's things that have been sitting there for a really long time. Nobody likes to go there. God, can you just smell that earthiness?
Gross.
Yes. Okay. That's exactly what we're talking about. And we can identify that, not to say it's good or bad or right or wrong, because those are human-made constructs, right? Those labels of good and bad and right and wrong. Remember, that's a human-made construct. In nature, there is It just is, right? So in our technology, if you've taken the assessment, you'll notice that we break down alchemy to into the using ores as a representation, not ores as in rowing a boat, but like ores like gold, silver, and copper, right? Now it's, again, like we're saying, it's not like Olympics. We're not all trying to get gold medal and stuff like that. Besides, there's no such thing as a copper medal. I think it's bronze, right? So,
Yes, it's
so
bronze.
that's why we chose copper. No, I'm kidding. But what happens is that understanding the distinction between a gold alchemy versus a silver alchemy versus a copper alchemy will help us eliminate the judgment and bias that happens when we experience what we experience in nature and not judge nature. We just don't choose not to be there. Same thing can happen. There are certain human beings that are within your alchemic range of tolerance, and there are certain human beings that just aren't. And there's nothing wrong with that. It just is. And believe it or not, it can happen inside the ecosystem of a family. Just because you gave birth to this kid doesn't mean this kid's going to be the same alchemy as you. Right.
And fun fact, all kids come in with a low alchemy, and it drains me every day. I mean, it drains parents potentially every day.
Yeah. So just so people understand, every human being comes into the world copper. Okay. And a copper refinement is a very tolerant, organic, earthy, alchemic tolerance level, right? Refinement. Meaning people with the copper alchemy can literally be super tolerant of dirt and organics and being out in nature and everything for days at a time. They don't feel the need to shower. And this is not a judgment call. It's kind of a cool benefit that you don't feel like you have to. You don't feel icky. You don't feel like you can't perform. Sometimes when you have a higher refinement, you know, the inconvenience of not being able to shower or having the creature comforts, as people would say in modern civilization, it could impact how their optimal performance. Or someone who's a copper alchemy, it won't impact their optimal performance. And that's why we say when organizations get big enough, it is critical that they have a representation of every ore of alchemy inside the organization. If you look, for example, I used to work in the video game industry for a long time, and I always explore, like, you know, Activision and EA. I go to Nintendo's and Sony's facilities, and they give me a tour from top down, and it's literally gold to copper. You go to the top, you meet the executives, you go to the silver, you see the management and the office workers, you go into the dungeon where the developers are, and it is straight copper most of the time, right? You get isolated pockets of silvers and here and there in practicality, and those typically are more like senior developers that have the ability to have systems and be able to manage the roll up their sleeves copper workers to really grind things out. The reality is that copper human beings are necessary to be able to ground the gold human beings, so things will actually get done in the grander scheme of things, right? Without that, then you got a bunch of like visionaries and people who are thinking about future stuff, but nothing ever gets done, right? So the reason why I'm talking about that is so that those who are gold, silver, or silver, gold, or gold, they don't start using their understanding of alchemy to start judging people, because that's exactly what we're wanting to steer away from, because people are already judging people without understanding this alchemy piece. This whole piece unlocks and untethers us from the need to judge and puts us in a place of objective understanding of what's happening, right? And so what we then do is there is a formula that we have, like if you're in the app and you can actually ask questions with Hi about this, but down the road, we're going to start to put more information in the app to educate people about understanding the range of tolerance. And we've broken it down to ranges of hours that you could spend with people, from 24 hours all the way down to like 1 hour. And when we explain this to people, there's very rarely pushback going, I don't know about that. They go, oh, that's why. That's why literally after me stepping, getting into, going out with this person, 2 hours later, we're like, can't stand each other anymore. Or that's why with this person, I can go all day, all night, and we're great. Why is that, right? And so with this understanding, it means that you have an opportunity to then optimize your network, optimize your environment. Because think about it, if you're a gold and you allow your office to become a copper environment, you're not going to perform at your best. So how to passively influence your ability to perform at an optimal level at work, at home, in your car, anywhere you go in life, is to make sure that everything that you have around you in your environment, along with the people and the network that you spend the most time with, are within range of your alchemic refinement.
Yeah, there's obviously a lot to unpack. I want to go through what a gold, a silver, a copper looks like, and how you can relate, sort of depending on where you are on that scale. But as you're talking about that, I do remember it was right after I met you. I took the assessment for the first time. My initial alchemy, I had younger kids. I want to put that little asterisk out there. So it was lower than what it is now. But it was a mid-range silver, kind of like right in the middle.
Yeah.
I had someone who worked for me at the time, and he didn't take the assessment, but this dude, like, low copper. You could tell the way that he carried himself, dressed, the space that he organized.
Right.
Whatever. Not a judgment, but it impacted me. Not him, but he kept our production room in my company so dirty. Every time I would walk in that room, I was physically drained, and I didn't get it. I'm like, I like this guy. He's a good person. He's a good human being. He's funny. We get along. But if I step in that room, I just want to jump out the window. And then I took the assessment. You explained that to me, and I had that moment. I was like, oh, that makes so much sense. So what we were able to do based on that was, I was like, okay, Jeff, at the end of the week, Friday afternoon, I just need you to take 1 hour, clean this up so that I don't think about it all weekend and walk in Monday morning and see this disaster. But I stayed out of the room the rest of the week unless I was really needed and I could go in there quickly. I knew Friday it was going to get cleaned. I didn't have to stress about it. And there was not that alchemic dissonance. So that's the story that popped in my head. But it's powerful because I didn't know that. I thought I was crazy, honestly, before that.
Yeah, no, and a higher level of optimization would be this, which is kind of how I've structured my life, is because I'm so busy, I don't often have time to keep my space the way I ideally would like it, and because of the nature of, my thoughts and everything being the way they are, my world starts to reflect that, right? And so I found out years ago, like, having a housekeeper was not a nice thing to have. It was a necessity for me to stay in my optimal state of existence, right? And so, like, in your situation, what I would do if you still had that going on, I would say, hey, part of what helps him stay in an optimal state is, it's kind of like nesting. It's like creating that space where he can do that. Then you have someone who has a more related alchemy to you to go in there after he's done and clean up, so that he can start over in the beginning of the week. Because him actually changing the alchemy of the environment, it'll take energy away from him just before he goes into the weekend. Right. So these little subtleties, I'm sure he did it anyway, but and that's why. But the cool thing was that you allowed him to create an optimal space for him to work in throughout the week. And on the weekend, just it's kind of like, putting your toys away type of thing.
Yes, which is what I tell my kids all the time, and they're not there yet.
Well, the age, so the age that you want to look for is where the alchemy starts to kind of settle in is 12. At the age of 12, human beings start to fall into their specific alchemic refinements a little bit more clearly, and you can start to observe that in your children, for those of you who have children. So prior to 12, if you try to force them in terms of to any kind of alchemy. So this is what I tell parents who are, and those of you who are listening to this and you have the app and you are thinking about becoming a parent, or you are a new parent and you find that you have an alchemy that is not copper, it's more like high silver or silver gold or gold silver or even gold. I know society and civilization and maybe economically, there are certain circumstances that judge human beings for bringing in nannies too soon or caretakers too soon. But when your alchemy is on the higher end of the scale in terms of the golds and gold, silver golds, your ability to optimally parent critically depends on your ability to maintain your optimal state of existence. So daddy me time, mommy me time, for those who have higher alchemies that are having very young children, it is really important that you create space that allows you to alchemically re-energize and rejuvenate. Otherwise, being in that alchemic fatigue state will pull all your drivers into the weak state, will pull you into a weaker expression of your physical body, which then, this is why people talk about mommy brain, people talk about dad bods. A lot of that comes from the physical impact of the energetic drain, alchemic drain of being around copper children all the time, if you have not a copper environment. So when you go into more copper environments and you see copper parents having kids, they don't need it as much because there isn't that alchemic drain, that happens naturally that we see in nature.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So, all right, why don't we go through it then? Because I want to get a picture of a high level overview. What are you really talking about? What do these different environments look like? And then you mentioned words like gold, silver, silver, gold. Now there's blends. Now I'm confused. So break this all down for me based on what someone would see in the app. How do we understand them? And then we could talk about the actual boundaries of tolerance and relating to other alchemies outside of ourselves.
Yeah. So we say gold, silver, and copper, but obviously human beings, we've been blended for thousands of millions of years now. 1.8. Okay, 2 million. Okay, that's still millions.
But who's counting?
Yeah, who's counting? Hundreds of thousands of years. And so what has happened is we've become more than just this distinctive gold, silver, and copper, right? And in nature, you see it as well. It's not just that clearly cut. So what we found through our 20 years of research is that people can be gold, and there's a range of gold. And there's a whole periodic table that we have that you don't have access to. It's what happens on the algorithm on the back end. But we have a whole section of gold, and we have a whole section that's gold, silver. And you can see that on the app. If you look at your core stats and look at results, it will tell you, are you gold, gold, silver, silver, gold? And if we go down, it's silver, and then it's silver, copper, and then copper, silver, and then goes to copper. Right. And so those are the different phases of transition of going through the different alchemies. Gold, the easiest way is like if you ever been to a staged home in an upscale community, and the way the home is staged to sell, people who are high gold, that's how they live their life. I mean, many of us have actually been to homes that are like that, where you go in and you say, are you guys selling your home? It's like, no, this is just how they live. Everything has this place, not only on the outside, but when you pull drawers open and open cabinets, it's also gold and refined on the inside. Okay. Now, there is something that needs to be understood, that people say, well, then why wouldn't anybody want to be gold? Because on the extreme ends, okay, because here's the thing, if you can see our periodic table, basically what we'll have is like the silver band is like the largest band. Silvers actually get along with with most people in the world, with the largest range of people in the world, because silvers it represents practicality. It represents a level of pragmatism that comes in that silver state, right? So silvers are the ones that they don't necessarily have to put everything away, but it's organized and it has logic behind it. Everything makes sense in that regard. There's a practicality about it. And so that's why, but if you go on extreme ends, the higher you go, the smaller the range of tolerance becomes. So golds, the challenge they have to deal with, for those that will say, I want to be gold, it's like the challenge they have is built into the nature of human beings that have that gold standard, that they have to learn to manage and how they express themselves in life. It's a strategy. Like one of my clients, or one of our co-founders, he's gold, and he's learned to brilliantly understand how to manage this piece, because otherwise it comes off very judgy. There's a judgment piece, and it's not because they're judging what's in front of them. Their level of standard is so high, it just comes off that way. They don't have the tolerance of something that is not as refined, right?
Is he pure gold or gold silver?
He's not 700. No, he's got like 2 points of silver in him. So there is a level of practicality that does come through.
Yeah, but I mean, you could tell it's interesting, because so when I first met him, it was over a video call, but like the office background,
it's like a museum. I mean,
yeah, it's a museum. Things are in cases and framed. It's meticulous, even the way he carries himself. And then, as we've seen the rest of his office on other calls, there's a conference room that's like the most beautiful conference room you've ever seen. It's like, what's going on here? But yeah, he's a gold alchemy. Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, there's a definite level. I mean, he's like a perfect example of what a gold alchemy would look like, right? On the extreme end of copper, it's really hard because coppers tend to struggle with being misunderstood for many of their life, and just having trouble showing up in a way where they are received, you know, in a way that is tolerable, right? It's like because they're so earthy and so organic and stuff like that. And, you know, in modern civilization, what modern civilization has considered modern is like moving away from the earthiness and having to camp outdoors and that type of thing. One of my videographers back in the day, he's actually still working with us on some of our social media videos. I hired him as a videographer for one of our events, and it's one of the events where, you know, everybody dresses up business casual, so it's not like dressed down, right? You have like khakis and a dress shirt or whatever the case may be, right? However you want to dress. What do you call business casual? I don't know, it's subjective. But so he shows up getting ready and setting up and everything with hiking boots, shorts, and a t-shirt, an old one at that, faded, whatever's going on. And I said, he goes, what? It's like, look around. You know, you're on our team and you're helping us out. He goes, I'm just a videographer. See, and it's nothing, it is no judgment. It's just like, okay. And so at that point I realized, like, copper, that's right. Okay. But, you know, I have to give him credit. The next day he showed up with a dress shirt, shorts, and hiking boots. I think it was a polo. I'm not quite sure, but he tried, and so it's great. I mean,
good for him.
Yeah, and it didn't change the way he worked or anything like that. However, that being said, because of my alchemy and how I structured the event, it was pretty fatiguing for him to be there all day.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take this in a different context. We'll say maybe it's an environment that he can tolerate, but he's wearing a tux. What is that doing to his energy long term over the course of the day?
So if you're saying if he's copper and he forces himself to put on a tux,
he's dressed in a gold manner.
Yeah. He's going to be uncomfortable. Those are the people that say, God, I can't stand being in this monkey suit. Right? It's one of those things where it will take energy away from him just planning and thinking about how to put together the tux and what to wear. It'll take energy away from him just to put it on and getting it all fitted right. If he looks in the mirror and he just sees how he's dressed in the tux, that will take a little bit of energy. So it's across the board. And as the day goes on, it keeps taking energy away from him. And then when he steps into the environment, if the environment is copper, but he's wearing a tux, eventually what's going to happen is unconsciously that tux is going to get dirty. It's going to get disheveled. It's going to get torn, but he's not going to do anything about it. Right. And there you go. Which leads me to a really cool dynamic. There's a couple of refinements that's a little bit on extreme. People can be gold coppers or copper golds. So there are a few dynamics that will have that reveal where they have nothing in the silver. They're either really, really refined or they're really, really organic, right?
And this is just to be clear for those of you watching, listening, this is shown on your app. So it'll say boundaries of tolerance in your core stats, whatever you are, the label for it. So like myself personally, gold, silver, and then in parentheses or in brackets, there's 3 numbers. Yeah. So the 2 numbers you're referring to would be 403 and 304, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct. Okay. So if you have one of those unique dynamics, you're one of those unique alchemies of what we call gold, copper, or copper gold, because you have no access to the practicality of silver. You're either totally earthy or you're totally refined. How we see this show up in humanity is we call these the shabby chics of the world, right? The gold coppers will be the ones who will go, spare no money on buying the best of the best. but the copper won't take care of it. So these are the Ferraris that you see on the road with like a duct tape across something, like it had a fender bender. Instead of fixing it, they put duct tape on it.
Stop it.
Okay.
I'm uncomfortable. I don't like this.
Right? Or they'll have like buy really expensive clothing or really expensive accessories, and it'll have like a little kind of like it won't be polished or whatever the case may be. And it's like, oh God, you know. On the other side, on the copper golds, what they'll do is they'll go to like flea markets, or they'll go to thrift shops and they'll buy like, you know, really cheap things, right? Or and then they'll bling it out to make it look gold, right? It's a really fascinating dynamic that we see in certain human beings, but you see a little bit of that in nature too, right? You'll see certain areas where it's like, this is obviously a very naturally gold area, and then there's those pockets of just weirdness that just shows up in different places, right? It doesn't happen often because again, it creates another set of unique challenges too. Because one moment you're like, you will make the gold choice, but next moment it will completely copper dynamic, right? And the reason why it doesn't make sense to a lot of people, because where does making sense live? It lives in the silver, right? So then people will say like, well, then what's the benefit of being gold copper? I mean, wouldn't that be like a curse? Not really, because now you got someone who can really kind of see, golds tend to be like ambitious, big picture thinkers, head in their clouds. And then if the copper dynamic will allow them to execute on that. Now, will they execute in the most practical way? No, that's when you surround yourself with silvers to help understand the structure of execution. And then your copper can roll up their sleeves, get in there and get it done, right? There's the beautiful thing about our technology. It doesn't say that, oh, there's something wrong with somebody, or it's like there's no better or worse. It just affords you the ability to start to create unique strategies of optimal success, no matter what your design is. Right. And it creates it in a pragmatic, structured blueprint way. You know, the problem with a lot of other things out there that I found in my experience is that they sort of give you a solution, but it's really up to you to kind of make the judgment call on what meaning you make of the explanation, what's going on. Whereas we're going to use it's like Legos, right? There's only one way to put Legos together, right? And what I love about Legos is that nature is kind of straightforward that way as well. You know, remember, we always talk about nature isn't complicated. Humans make it so. Right.
Yeah. So that's the high level of all three: gold, silver, copper. I'm curious to go through this in real time. So you obviously can't control the environment all of the time. I mean, maybe you work in an office that's very gold and you're very copper, and that's uncomfortable. Maybe it's the opposite. Or maybe you go to a friend's house. Actually, that happened to me recently. I went to a friend's house just for lunch quickly, and they have to be copper. It's not my speed, we'll say. It is draining for me to be there. But I have to know how to interact in those environments. I can't just only be friends with people who are gold and gold, silver. How about this? An example that happened within weeks of each other with myself and one of our clients, Sandy. Shout out, Sandy. We love you. We were at an event in January, and the hotel we were staying in, very copper. It was very uncomfortable for the two of us. We bonded over that because she's a high silver. You already heard my alchemy. Fast forward a couple weeks later.
I think she's silver gold, isn't she?
Silver. I believe she's silver.
Okay.
Higher silver. So close enough. Fast forward a few weeks to our HumanOp retreat, and the place we stayed was pretty gold. It was gold silver because I picked it.
Yep.
So, but in those scenarios, it was fascinating to see how people adapted. You had the event in Texas with the two of us, and we were pretty drained just showing up to the event because we had stayed in this room that was very copper.
Yeah, you couldn't rejuvenate overnight, and
there's none of it. Like going to the hotel was actually stressful. I would have rather been out with people, and for me, this is where the whole grid comes into place, right? My non-existence should not be with people for the whole day. But it was actually more beneficial for me to be out and with people than back in the Copper hotel room. I was drained less.
Who
But then
chose the hotel room?
What?
Who chose the hotel room?
The event organizer. They had a hotel room block, and it was. I mean,
so
it was
the event organizer, were they also kind of a lower alchemy?
Yeah, they're lower alchemy. But you don't think of those things. At least it wasn't on my mind, because so it was a Marriott, and this isn't a knock against Marriott. I love Marriott, as a matter of fact. But this particular property, it was older, it wasn't maintained, and I didn't know that before walking into the room. So, well, I'll pause there and say, like, in that scenario, what is the best way for the two of us, understanding our alchemy, to not be drained by that environment?
I would say if it's economically feasible, it would make sense to just opt to stay somewhere else.
So walk in the room, be like, nope, Copper, not for me. Check out and go walk in somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, that would be kind of like the quick and dirty, solution.
Yeah,
quick and clean solution.
Quick and much cleaner.
Yeah. I think what this opens up the door to understanding is, how do we do this with human beings as well, that we obviously sometimes have to spend time with. The interesting thing we found is that when we are within 10 feet of an alchemic environment or human being that is not ideal, that's when the clock starts to tick. Once you move 10 feet or more away, and you'll notice this, when you guys stepped off the property and you hit that 10-foot threshold away from that property, if you pay attention, you can feel a shift start to happen. Like the timer starts to go the reverse direction in terms of tolerance.
Well, the actual event room, like the event space, we were both in alchemic alignment with it. It was a silver gold environment. Like, we were great as soon as we got there, but at the hotel property, draining.
Yeah. And so that's what happens there. And so for me personally, I would be like, sleeping here would be pointless. I'd much rather take a hit and just go pay for my own place, right? Or find an Airbnb, and that is, because you're good at that. Find an Airbnb that's of a higher alchemy and just stay there, right? And I think that's really the best way to handle that situation. If it's not economically feasible, like you were saying, minimize amount of time you actually spend there. If there are things that can be replaced that the hotel can do for you, then do that, right? Because I've been to a situation where, like, the sheets and the topper were just like, yeah, that's suspect. That's very sus, And then I'll ask them. I said, hey, is there any way we can change that? There's this smell that's in the sheets. Like, oh, sorry, no problem. But then again, I don't tend to put myself in that situation. But I remember in the past that has happened, right? If like a coffee machine is broken, whether or not I'm drinking coffee, I'm asking for one that works. If the radio is not working, even though I may or may not be, it doesn't matter. My alchemy, is for me to feel like, okay, at least that's working if I want to use it. If the TV has issues and stuff like that, and the toilets have it, okay. So then you have the hotel do the best they can, whatever can be replaced, you replace it so that it raises the alchemy ever so much, right? And like you were saying, minimize the time you actually spend there.
So how do you do that? Let's take that very same context. You have someone with a higher alchemy and they're in a lower alchemy space, or vice versa, and it's a workplace. Now you can't do a whole lot of that stuff. What's the best strategy for someone in that scenario?
So if you have your own desk in that scenario, or do you have your own office?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay.
Man,
so
if you're listening, you're like, that's me. Put it in the comments.
Most people who are working in a workspace, it's not their own business, right? Obviously, because if you're your own business, then you wouldn't create the alchemy of your business to be against yourself. But you typically, even if it's a cubicle, you have your own space. And that's why you start to see a beautiful, if you look into these, and we've been to organizations where you can tell just by walking by cubicles, whose alchemy is what. The most important thing then is that whatever space you can control, you make it as in alignment to your alchemy as possible. Again, this is not a nice to have thing we're talking about here, okay? Because there's so much misunderstanding of alchemy in the world, people are so afraid of being judged about being subtly different or very different from the person right next to you that they don't do anything about it and they just tolerate it. Okay, that's the wrong way of dealing with alchemic tolerance, because the ripple effects of that is that it's going to put you in a continuous state of depletion, energetic depletion. And whether or not it's immediate or subtle throughout the day, this is why people who are in alchemically misaligned environments at work, they leave work every day exhausted, and they think they're working hard, but most of the time they're working hard just trying to stay in the workflow while being drained at the same time. It's like there's a pinhole in your bucket of energy that you have every single day that the minute you show there, you show up to work, it opens up and starts to drain out, whether or not you're even doing anything. Right? You'll see this with people who are alchemically environments that are not in alignment with their alchemy at work. Those are the ones who consistently leave the office to go eat for lunch. And the ones who are very in line with it, they often have totally comfortable and fine sitting there in their cubicle or on their desk and just eating away. Right?
Yeah, I'm thinking about this from the perspective of, okay, if you're the leader or the business owner, you're listening to this, and of course, you're not going to set up an environment that's dissonant to what you need. But for your employee, you might have great employees that find themselves in this very situation. I think back to the story I told earlier about Jeff. When I forced my alchemy on the environment, he made mistakes left and right. He was drained, exhausted, and I didn't know why. Now that you say that, I completely understand why. When I let him dictate the space Monday through Friday and then clean up at the end, he was a rock star. So just being flexible enough to understand there's more dynamics at play, but it's also explainable by science and this tool. You can relieve a lot of that stress and a lot of those issues in the workplace.
It's a game changer. I mean, we've gone into large Fortune 500 companies where they have like bullpen open workspaces. And doing our process, because we used to just do it in phases, in the simplest thing to remedy really is alchemy when it comes to those types of workspaces. So we would go in and consistently across the board, every time we come in and say, okay, let's rearrange the room first while we're working on the rest of the strategies to optimize the team. And let's put all the golds on one side, all the silvers in the middle, and all the coppers on the other side, split it up. Consistently across the board, we see performance numbers go up by 25% or more just by doing that.
That's crazy.
Yeah. If you're having conflicts in the workplace that don't make any sense, oftentimes it's an alchemy thing, right? I had a client where it was very male heavy in the group, and so there was only 2 females in his employee teams, right? And they got along because they're the only 2 females there, right? And so he decided to put them next to each other in terms of their workspace and their desk. And I told him, no, don't do that. You've got a gold and you've got a copper. Yeah, they might get along because they're girls and they have like, and they were like besties, right? But it was before they were put next to each other. And he goes, no, they're fine. They're like total besties. I'm like, okay. But no more than maybe a week later. He goes, wait, I don't know what to do. They're fighting all the time now. They hate each other. I thought they were besties. It says, question, did you put them together in the same space? It's like, yeah, I put the cubicles right next to each other. I said, and what did I tell you? He goes, oh. I said, I have a simple solution for you. He goes, split them up? Yeah. Move one to the other side of the room. That's it. 2 weeks, I didn't hear from him. Why? Because he didn't want to tell me I was right. Okay. And I said, well, when did you notice that it changed? I was like, he goes, the next day. They went out to lunch. They were laughing again. They're totally happy. I'm like, yeah.
Imagine that.
It was an alchemy thing.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that. We talked about being in the workplace or in the environment. You mentioned within 10 feet of somebody or a place, but a person now, you can start to feel that where the alchemy is off. So what does that look like? You mentioned also at the beginning of the episode, we've gotten it down to windows of time you can spend in the environments with those people. Yeah. So break that down for me from a personal relationship standpoint.
Yeah. So if you are from a gold if you take a gold person to a gold silver person, right? What you'll generally find there, depending on what the numbers are, right? You'll generally find that it can be anywhere from as close as 24/7, no energy drain, mutual energy drain, to maybe as much as, 6 to 8 hours, okay, before there is mutual energy drain. And that means 6 to 8 hours without leaving each other from 10 feet, being 10 feet or more away from each other. Because the minute you move away, it just immediately starts to go back. Unless you step away into an even worse alchemic environment, then yours is going to go down and theirs is going to go up, right? Now, when you go from gold to silver gold, that's when you start to hit the limits a little bit. So it goes from 4 to 5, 6 hours, and then maybe over to 2 to 3, okay? Now, when you go past high silver and you start going to more silver area, that's when it's like, no, it's immediate drain as soon as you start getting close to each other. And we're talking about really high gold. If you happen to have a 700, like 7 in your gold, 0 in your silver, 0 in your copper, then that's what'll happen, right? Gold, silver, silver, gold, anybody in that row, it's pretty compatible, because we're looking at no more than like 8 to 10 is probably kind of like where it's at. But a general rule of thumb, 6 to 8 if you're on the gold, silver, silver, gold, at the furthest point from each other. Most of the time, people are gold, silver, silver, gold. Not really an issue, okay? When you get to the silver range, that's when it starts to spread. That's what we say high silver, middle silver, low silver, and stuff like that. It runs a little bit more of a gambit, but silvers, they can have tolerance all the way up to the silver golds, all the way up to the copper silvers and everything like that. So that's what we're looking at there. So the typical range that you'll see, and if you're not quite sure, you can play with these numbers, right? It's 24/7, then it's 6 to 8 hours, and then it's 2 to 3 hours. Those are really kind of the 3 focal points of the ranges. And when you start to notice that and you say, okay, after a certain point, if you start to get into silly arguments that make no sense, that later on you think about, why did we even argue about that? More often than not, it's an alchemic dissonant moment. In other words, you guys have kind of bottomed out on the level of tolerance that you guys can have, and the time limit is up, and then now you guys are just fine. The cerebral part is trying to reconcile with the nature part of trying to figure out, why do I not feel good? Why is there this energy drain, right? And if you don't know anything about alchemy, then you start to look at what's part of that ecosystem, and you look at that person, and then the human beings naturally will, trying to figure out what's going on, will make meaning of something in a distorted way because you've been energetically drained.
Yeah. So in terms of operating within these scenarios, I want to be careful with my words, because I was going to say, in terms of dealing with these people, you're not dealing, you're just objectively understanding
and making objective choices of optimal choices of management.
Right. From yourself and also of them. So operating in these scenarios, if you find that you are a higher gold, silver, gold, and you're operating with someone who's copper, silver, copper, and this drain is going to be there. The example you gave with the 2 women in the workplace, what is an appropriate strategy to cope with that, and then also to work together, because you have to spend time with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I also want you to explore, what does this look like virtually too, because a lot of people work virtually now, but this still carries over. How do you
affect the frequency and the language of how we show up when we speak, when everything like that, it carries a little bit of that alchemic frequency.
Yeah. So how do you navigate that, understanding you're not offending anybody? It's an understanding of yourself, an optimal understanding of yourself, but you do have to be in that environment with that person, and you have to be productive.
Yeah, I'll give you a great example. So Dave, as we all know, has a lower alchemy. And it used to be we would get together every once in a while, have physical in-person meetings, right? He's a very big stretch from me. And about an hour or so into the meeting, I'll say, hey, Dave. He goes, yeah. It says, can we take a quick break? I'm having a bit of an alchemy attack. And then he'll come back and say, oh, is that what that is? Because he was feeling it too, but he didn't know, right? And, because we're in this world together, we understand not to jump to judgment and meaning making in the moment, and just like being curious as to what's going on right now. And so sure enough, we would step away, recharge for about half an hour or so, then we come back, and then we step away, and then we come back. As time goes on, the dynamic between those two human beings start to become part of what is expected to maintain optimal existence with each other. I'll tell you another example. My mom and I, it only took us like 50 years to figure this out.
Oh, good. Nice and quick.
Yeah. And it happened just a couple of years ago where once again, she came to visit and we were in the same space, staying in the same house, and things would just blow up between us. And then, over the years, my sister and my dad just like chalked that off to like, they just have this weird relationship. And because if I think back, why are we even fighting over that? Why is that worth fighting over? Right. And she would always ask us, like, why are we even fighting over that? And finally, this last time I said, I'm going to look at our results again, both of ours. Sure enough, out of every family member, my mom is the furthest away from me alchemically. She is low silver. I'm in the gold silver. And that means immediate energy drain every time we come within 10 feet of each other. So the question was, well, how did we manage that? When I explained that to her, she finally got it after all this time. She goes, no wonder, because I kept thinking, it's like, what did I say? And what did he say? What did we do? Why are we fighting? That's my son. Don't we love each other? Blah, blah, blah. Right. And I said, it's not an issue of whether or not we love each other. It's just, there's an alchemic dissonance that happens. So for the rest of our time here, whenever we would go out, we would have meals together, we would do things together, right, to a limited capacity. We would always be exhausted by the time we came back. But now we understood, so we didn't make meaning of it in a way that started to have us attacking each other or doing something to kind of figure out what's going on. She would go upstairs, I would stay downstairs 10 feet away, and we'd be happy as a lark. And most of the day, that's how it'd be. And when she came down and she was having to spend time down there after I started feeling something and she felt something, I would go upstairs, right? And a lot of people, society and culture and family dynamics would have these general, like, that's no way to, treat your mom or family, stuff like that. It's like, we're not talking about that. Again, those are human-made constructs. We're looking at the nature of things, right? Nature has this funny way of helping us understand more about ourselves and others by just presenting these really interesting dynamics from people that are blood related. You would think we would have similar alchemies, but we don't. Right? It's just, I think it's nature's joke sometimes. Sometimes like I had a family of 5 where the dad was gold and everybody else is like silver and low silver. So he had a dedicated room that was a no-go from everybody. And before the assessment was introduced to the family, they used to make fun of him. It's like, oh, that's dad's island. Don't go there. That's no man's land. It's like lava. Don't go there, right? But after everybody got revealed to the assessment there, everybody was like, oh, no wonder. Judgment went away. Understanding came into place. And it was really cool to see the family become closer as a result of that,
Yeah, that's my office for me, is dad zone. Nobody touch anything. If you touch it, you're going to lose a finger potentially.
Right.
But I mean, how does that happen? Because I'm thinking to my family, like my parents and my brother, and the 3 of them are much lower alchemies. And it always bugged me until I really understood, like, okay, this is just me, how I'm wired. How does that happen in a family dynamic? Because it happened to you too, obviously. And I've seen other examples of this. Where does that come from?
Well, it just depends. And in the prominence of physical attributes, remember, everything starts with our physicality, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so depending on, how we physically formed as time went on, it's less about environmental influence as it is about what becomes more prominent, because certain physical characteristic features have a higher resonance with certain alchemic alignments, gold, silver, and copper, right? Those who have the characteristic traits that lend towards more on the regal side or even the effervescent side will have a more natural resonance with the gold, if you think about the regal king and that type of thing, right? And everything is all connected and blended that way. There is a meaning to the madness of everything we have put together. So and what that also, how that also is impacted, this is where we can get a little bit deep in terms of, well, if we're all born in the same place, how does that happen? Well, here's the thing, is that what the top, the traits section measures is how we were, like where we were on Earth during the period of time of our physical formation, which is the formative years of 0 to 3. And we don't realize the subtle impact that gravitational force, not just from Earth, but we're talking about moon and sun and all the other things in the entire universe impacting Earth all at the same time, right? And depending on where you are on Earth, there's subtle shifts in how it impacts the gravitational formation of yourself, right? Our technology runs deep in helping understanding that. Now, a lot of people say, well, isn't that kind of like astrology? Yeah, but astrology is just a watered down version of astronomy, astronomical figures. So the numbers that went into the mathematical calculation has more to do with astronomical understanding and the figures and the gravitational impact that different gravitational forces will have in an entire universe, our solar system and beyond. And it's very subtle. I mean, it's to the point where we can't really fully grasp all of it. But using math and science, we can create a precise generality on terms of how it'll impact a human being. So during the formative years, depending on where you are, where you went, I mean, let's say, for example, you and your siblings played in different schools or went to different playgrounds and doing, well, 0 to 3, you're not doing really much of that. But depending on where your parents traveled or took you to travel during those periods of time, during the formative years, right? Now, they may have taken your siblings who are older or younger, you know, when they're in their 0 to 3 and you're not 0 to 3, and you're, well, you're out of your formative years already. So the gravitational impact of where you went is not going to be as impactful as if it was a sibling that was in 0 to 3, right? So these factors are all come into play and taken into account in our algorithmic, in the patent algorithm behind HumanOp itself. But what that does then, it starts to, you know, from a natural way, during the formative years, start to dictate, well, eventually you will probably have a propensity for this type of alchemic expression. And that's why it doesn't really settle in until you're 12 years old. During that whole period of time, the I wouldn't say environmental influence, but more like quantum forces of influence is going to be what's going to be at play at that point.
This is fascinating. I'm thinking, you know, my kids are 6, 4, and 2. And during their 0 to 3 years, my oldest was only in New Jersey. My middle daughter, was split almost equally between Jersey and North Carolina. And my youngest was almost exclusively North Carolina. They're going to be so effed up.
No, it's not so much effed up. It's about cool. So if you were to longitude or latitudinally kind of like mark down those periods where you guys were generally during those periods of time in your life, you'll start to be able to get to the foundations of how we determine your physical traits, right? But you can actually track of where your oldest was to where your middle child was to where your youngest was, and how that actually impacted their physicality, right? That's
crazy.
why in certain areas of the world, you see a higher concentration of certain types of physical traits that lend to characteristic traits that we described. Like there are countries that have a lot of access to that sympathetic trait. And for those of you who have sympathetic trait, you'll notice that in the description of that encourages you, depending on the volume of what you have there, it encourages you to take a daily power nap between the hours of 2 and 4, right? There are countries, as we all know, that shut down between 2 and 4 just to allow the high concentration of those with the sympathetic trait in those countries, because of their location on Earth and how they were formed as they grew up there, is going to, that's why they built that in. Now, whether or not they knew this technology, they were aligning themselves with the nature of things and created a societal or a cultural adaptation as a response to what nature helped them understand about themselves.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because you think like the first one that pops into my head is Italy. And I've never been there, but almost the rest of my family has, and they've said that. Spain too. The country shuts down for the afternoon. They take the long lunch and then they nap. And it's like, wow, that we got so good as a species of listening to our bodies and just realizing that hey, I'm not productive. Maybe we should all take a nap and shut the town down, and we'll come back and try again after that.
Right.
And we just got away from that.
Yeah.
And we're going to bring you back. That's the whole point.
Yeah. So it's interesting because because of the high concentration of its physical location on Earth, right? And how it then gets impacted by the entire solar system. That's what we're talking about there in terms of the formative years. So let's say, for example, you had your oldest in New Jersey, your middle ones, New Jersey, North Carolina, and then your third, you say, let's go to Italy for like the first 4 years. Okay. All of a sudden it grows up and it's like, wait, what happened? It's very subtle because there's, genetics at play and everything, obviously. Right. And because of your ethnic background, now we're looking at DNA, RNA markers and the switches that go on and off during those formative years when put in an environment where it encourages the switches of that forming in that longitudinal, latitudinal place on Earth. Now you've got physics at play, physical impact, gravitational impact to switch a few things on ever so subtly so that human being start to exhibit physical characteristic traits that are reflective of the region they're in, should they have the genetic background of the origins from that area.
This is crazy. We could nerd out about this all day. What I'm taking away is we're going to have a fourth kid. We're going to move to Antarctica for 3 years and just see what happens. This is now a science experiment. This is a real life science experiment for me.
I know, it would be fascinating. And we hear about it all the time. And a lot of people will say, well, it's because of the people there, society and culture there. Yes and no, because there's a higher concentration of a physical frequency of physical resonance there, right? It will also bathe that human being along. And so it encourages that. So there's a lot of nature at play from a variety of different factors. But the most important thing is understanding gravitational force and its impact during the formative years of the physicality of a human being is going to have a ripple effect on how they ultimately express later on in life.
Yeah, it's super cool. We got a little off track from alchemy, but that's okay. We went deep on alchemy and understanding it. So let me hit you with this. What is the question for the episode? For somebody listening, watching, they can go to High, ask this question, and get a deeper understanding of their alchemy, how to operate with their alchemy, how to be in relationships, whatever it is. What's the question?
Yeah. Well, let's start with first. I mean, the first thing you do is we can always use it towards other human beings and everything like that. And I think as you have conversations with High, you'll figure that out in terms of the correct prompt to ask that. But the most important thing I want people to, because they often forget this, is how do I create the best environment at home or even at work that best reflects my alchemy? And then if you want to be even more precise, so High doesn't have to go and rummage through and find your alchemy. High already does every time you start having conversation. But in case you want to do, you could just say what your alchemy is. And it's good to say that because a lot of times you want to repeat it so you don't forget what alchemy you are, what drivers you have. A pop quiz you can always give yourself. It's like, what are my pilot and co-pilot drivers are? What is my alchemy? And if you want to get really good, what are the numbers that sit in my alchemy? What range of tolerance do I have? Right.
Interesting. All right. There's your test for the episode. Go do that. Come back on the next episode of Running with Scissors, and we're talking all about communication styles or energy centers, moving down the sections of the app. We got, I think, 2 more of these episodes to go. Then we are complete on the different sections of the HumanOp assessment. Thanks for listening to Running with Scissors. We will see you on the next.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Running with Scissors. Have you downloaded the HumanOp app yet? Head over to humanop.com to experience the power of this technology for yourself. See you on the next episode of Running with Scissors.